Hey good looking, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be featuring dupe shadows for the cult classic favorite, well, kind of highly adored Natasha Denona Gold Palette, and here it is. Also, I do want to bring into attention the fact that this was allegedly a discontinued palette, and now we can see it that it is seemingly back in stock in Sephora. So is it truly discontinued or not? I'm going to go ahead and dive into what I found out about it so far, but also I do want to go ahead and get started on the swatches because I'm giving you guys the comparisons. I broke down and I decided to purchase the Natasha Denona Gold Palette, so I have it here, and I found you guys the closest, the most juiciest, everything I could possibly, down to the hue, the shadow, the shade, the tone, the saturation, and the shiny, shifty sparklies. I did it all for you guys, and it's coming right up, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Kendra Morgan Official, and I like to put out content weekly centered around makeup brushes that aren't Morphe, some single eyeshadows, and sunscreen. So if you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe to my channel down below. I feel like maybe I'm beating a dead horse because I've already put out a video about the Natasha Denona Gold Palette, how I thought it was being discontinued, and how dare they bring FOMO to us. Before I even put out the video, I did go ahead and purchase the palette because I thought back in stock. I really truly don't know if it's discontinued. I'm led to believe that it is discontinued because of one reason and one reason only, and it's not because Natasha Denona, the makeup artist and brand owner and CEO of the company Natasha Denona Cosmetics, said so, but because it was taken off of the website Natasha Denona. So that leads me to believe that if it was taken off of the website, more than likely it's probably being discontinued, and for whatever reason Sephora restocked this palette, whether it be overstock, whether this was a late shipment due to, you know, the current climate situation. I know many of you guys have had the conversation down in the comment section of my previous video on this, that, you know, due to shipping delays and things of that nature, that this is possibly was supposed to be before she ever took it off of the website. And I would say I probably would agree with that. There's probably just been some timing issues that have been centered around this. Now, as far as finding any actual verbiage that Natasha Denona herself has said that the palette is discontinued, haven't found anything like that. In fact, I would say I would go as far as to say there has been actually the ignorance of discussing this topic, and that is, I found in my Instagram, Natasha Denona's page, she posted a picture of many of the large palettes, and one of them that was in there was the Natasha Denona Gold, and many people were asking, is this discontinued? Did you discontinue this? Many were already assuming that it was discontinued as well, and saying that they wish they had gotten the palette. There was never any acknowledgement from Natasha Denona that, or addressing of the issue. She made no comments or replies at all. Hello? Hello?
Hi, I'm Jessica calling from GBC Business Group. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm in the middle of work though.
Business Group, we handle your company's incoming and outgoing customer calls at a very cheap rate.
Okay. So sorry. I thought that was somebody from the school calling. So back to where I was at. The Natasha Denona has not confirmed nor denied the discontinuing of the palette. So all we know so far is that it has been taken off of the Natasha Denona website and that it is currently in stock at Sephora. I think Canada still has stock, as well as the United States Sephora site. So if you're still interested in the palette, it is for sale right now, currently, as I'm filming this. So without any further delay, I do want to go ahead and get into the video of comparison swatches and what I found for dupes for that. Now, keep in mind that I did the best I could with what I had, but this has been to date the hardest palette I have had to dupe. And I will say that it is it was quite difficult to dupe this. you know, saturation, tone, hue, everything. I scoured my collection top to bottom, discontinued eyeshadows from brands that are out of business. I went through it all just to find the shadow I thought would best dupe each shadow in the collection. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you guys what I found. There are the dupe palette and the actual Natasha Denona Gold side by side right here for you, and in just a moment I'll go ahead and start the swatches. So the first shadow in the palette that I'm duping is Lime Chrome. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a swatch. I'll swatch Natasha Denona Shadows on top, and then below it we'll give you the dupe shades. So that's Lime Chrome, and for that I used the shade from Pastel Roses UK, and that shadow is, just a moment, I didn't write any notes down, I apologize. It's Starburst. It really overdoes and overpowers the Lime Chrome shadow, but it was the one that matched the tone and everything else as best as possible. I'm gonna go ahead and build up opacity, or attempt to anyways, so you guys can see. Starburst has more of a green shift to it, and the Lime Chrome really does stay true to a very warm base with a sparkly shift. So moving on, this is going to be a cream to powder formula. Python is the shade, and it is I would say a true teal. Shadow really doesn't impress me too much. I wish she would have left this formula out, but I decided to use Makeup Geek's Time Travel. It is not duping in formulation whatsoever, but the shade, saturation, hue, everything else fits it fairly well. I would say if Python was a creamy matte, I think that it would match almost, you know, like a 95% rate, but because that's a cream to powder, the Time Travel does look a little bit more blue instead of like green. Okay, this one gets really tricky. Sparks is a chroma shade, and on the swatch it doesn't look very impressive. There's really nothing spectacular about it. I'm gonna build up the swatch here so you guys can see as much of that translucent base with the sparkly shifts in it. I chose JD Glow's White Gold. It was about as close as I had. Keep in mind, I did look through every highlighter I had. I had really cheap shadows I thought might come across as very translucent looking, but White Gold was what I could carry off. And so the next shade in the palette is Aria, which is also a creamy matte, and I use the shade Creme Brulee from Makeup Geek to dupe that. I tried to get as close again to the undertone and saturation as I possibly could. You'll see on the swatch, or on the shadow, it looks a little bit lighter in tone, but actually upon the swatch it's not too terribly off. It is a little bit lighter, but I feel like it carries out that pink undertone that we're really looking for. I use the shadow from another palette to dupe the shade Kava. Here I'm going to go ahead and show you guys on my finger as well as in a swatch. This is again another chroma crystal, or it's a crystal shadow. So again, it's got that sparkly topper shade. It's just very like a translucent clear base. I use a couple shadows from the Katie Ecstasy Friendication palette, and it looks like the shadow that I'm using is, I don't even remember what it was called, but anyways, there you have it. I use from the Dose of Colors, but don't worry, I use another shade to dupe another shadow in this collection. So that palette had a couple of shadows that had the same consistency of kind of that sparkler shade. Aurora is a chroma crystal, so a little bit more pigmentation, but it still has that crystally, glittery, sparkly shadow on top. I also use one of the shades from Friendication. I forget which shadow it is. Hopefully you guys can see on the palette. It was really kind of hard to tell which shade it was going to be. So I think it was the shade Try Me, and the shade before that was Churro, maybe? I'm not sure. When you have to flip over the palettes and look, you never really know if it lines up directly behind it or if it reads the same way, so it'd be enantiomerically. Anyways, you can see this one has a little bit more depth to it, has seemingly a black base, but it's about as close as I get. Now, I also found Autumn Breeze to be basically the same shadow, shade, saturation, and hue, and when I swatch that shadow and I put the next shade, Aurora, next to it, you can see that it's really, really similar. The Makeup Geek round shadow is more opaque and it is more shimmery, not glittery, but if you wanted another option for a dupe, that could be it. Dijon, that's a creamy matte, and you can see in the swatch, it is super, super mustardy looking. I've never seen a shade quite so mustardy and beige all in one swatch, but there you have it. I'm building this one up just merely for grins and giggles because I really want to show you guys. Tiki Hut from Makeup Geek is what I choose. It is that yellow row in the neutrals palette. It doesn't lean yellow enough, but it was as yellow as I could possibly get, and had me at yellow. The shade right above it is too light, so that's what I ended up going with. It's a little bit more neutral. It should have more yellow in it, but again, as close as I possibly could get. So Oro is a metallic in the gold palette, and I'm swatching it right here for you. I used the shadow by Firene, and it is called Luxury. You can see in the swatch it's much more golden, but it gives the amount of luster and the amount of pigmentation that Oro has. I just think that it's a little bit more yellow. So this is Oro, and this is the Firene Luxury, and this is Makeup Geek's Untamed. And I feel like Firene's Luxury and Makeup Geek's Untamed, if they had a baby, would be the shade Oro. So I didn't end up using Makeup Geek's Untamed just for the simple fact that it doesn't quite give as much luster, and I feel like that's important. But I think that either one would be suitable. Then the shade Log, which is a dark brown, is swatched from the gold palette. It's really, really dark and dusty and musty. I guess it's probably not musty is not the word for it. But then I used the shade Coffee Before Talkie by Makeup Geek. Side by side in the finger swatch right there, you can see that the shadows do have a slight differentiation in undertone. Log's a little bit more pink undertone, and then Coffee Before Talkie is more of like a yellowy orange undertone. So again, undertones, not a whole really good job, but I gave it my best shot. So Varis, this is a metallic, and it's one of Hannah Louise Poston's favorite shadows in the gold palette. I feel like it's beautiful. It's what I have on my lid today, and surprisingly enough, I find Sydney Grace's Amber to be a perfect, I wouldn't say perfect, but a suitable dupe in this case. It's got a little bit higher of a luster, and the undertones don't quite match up 100%, but I would say the tones and the saturation are pretty close that you wouldn't notice a difference on the eyes. Brass is a metallic shade in the gold palette. Again, I struggled with this shadow and finding a suitable representative shade. I ended up going with Glam Shop Poland's Ornament shade. It is glitzy, it's glittery, it's kind of shimmery, it's got some nice texture to it, and I think it matches that texture really well. And if you look, when I'm bending it back and forth, you can see a reddish undertone from the Ornament shade. So I think that kind of, mimics that Brass shade about as close as I can possibly get. What is that? What's that on my arm? Get it off. Okay, Sandstone, that's a creamy matte, and upon swatch, it's very buttery, very beautiful, very beige. Sydney Grace's Toffee is what I use as a dupe for that. It's a little bit lighter. Probably would say it's a little bit more yellow in tone, although I do think the undertones blend out to be about even. This is one of those where the saturation and tone doesn't quite match up. The shade Alchemist, upon swatch, very nice shimmery bronze gold shade, And I'm sure you guys are sick and tired of seeing this, but Sydney Grace's Bronze to Perfection is the shade that I used to dupe it. Super, super high luster. It's exponentially more shimmery than the Alchemist shade. I know that, but this was as close in hue as I could possibly get. So if you dulled that down and just kind of blended out the shadow like I'm doing on the swatch right here, you could possibly get something very similar to Alchemist. Teak, also a creamy matte in the Natasha Denona Gold Palette, gets duped by a shade in the, I think it's also in the yellow section. You can see it. I struggled to get a proper swatch on that. Makeup Geek's Deja Brew. I think that's in her yellow column also. So you can see kind of a common trend here that Makeup Geek's got that yellow row, and a lot of those shades kind of mimic tones in the gold palette. But here you can kind of see it's a little bit darker and brown, and actually the undertone's more yellow and the other one is peach. So probably didn't quite carry that one out as successfully as I would like. This has really turned into, let me critique how well I thought I duped the Natasha Denona Gold Palette. Aureum is a CP, which is a cream to powder. It's a little bit more than a satin. I used this shade from Gimme Glow Coconut Slushy. It's available in a single shadow. It is also available in the Summer Vibes palette, which I actually own the Summer Vibes palette, but you can buy it as a single. Again, this kind of lacks that saturation in orange depth, but I think it goes and it would achieve some of the similar vibes. Those are some of the shadows that I chose to dupe the vibes of the Natasha Denona Gold Palette. Let me get back in focus here. Oh, folks. Okay, so I'm gonna call you to comment down below how well you think I duped the vibes of this palette. I tried my hardest to find shadows that would, suit the saturation, the pigmentation, the undertones, the sparkliness, so, like that hybrid formula, that orbital, if you will, that depth and dimension that some of those shadows really bring to the table. I just want to finish off with my final thoughts on, I know we touched on the psychological aspects of discontinuing a palette and then bringing it back. We saw it from ColourPop when they brought back the Hocus Pocus palette. I think there was another palette that was brought back, and it really brings some questions into mind, like, were these in stock and they've just been sitting in a warehouse for legitimately 12 months now, for in ColourPop's case, Hocus Pocus. Sorry, my phone's like kind of going off. It's a little crazy. Or are these being made because there was so much demand for them that they're actually really just truly listening to the customers' feedback? I don't know. I really can't answer that. I want to say that I think that in this case, this was probably a delay in shipment due to the current economic climate and what we're all facing. I will say I don't know how I feel about, I partly acted on the FOMO and I partly acted on the true quality and, what am I trying to say here? I partly acted on FOMO and then I partly acted on what I've already went over and the criteria that I use to help decide whether or not to purchase a palette that I've duped. And I'll bring that to your attention, that video. I'll link that in the eye for you. But over and over again, I have in live streams, I've seen videos, I've seen reviews and tutorials where this palette is used, and over again, people mention formula. And that is probably my number one reason that I always suggest to somebody to purchase a palette even after they've duped it or even after they've went through their collection to see what they have. And this might be causing like some interference with my sound. Hopefully not. Natasha Denona's Gold Palette has 6 different formulations. It has crystal chroma, it has chroma, it has cream to powder, cream to matte, metallic, and one other formula in it. So there are 6 different formulas present within this palette. There's 6 different dimensional types of shadows that you would need to be watching out for. not just, you know, mattes, not just, you know, shimmers. It's a lot of different dimensions. So that's what truly led me to feel like it's okay if I go ahead and invest in the shadows. Another criteria that I probably didn't mention in the previous video that I talked about when it's okay to, you know, give yourself grace and mercy and permission to purchase a duped palette is the very fact that these shadows are actually, they're able to be taken out and removed from the palette. So I own the Safari palette, and while I do have to say that I don't like the cream to powder formula, I have the Natasha Denona Safari palette right here, and I can take out one of the matte shadows from this palette and go ahead and substitute it in there. Or maybe I like, you know, don't really appreciate very many of the shimmers in this. I can take those out and put mattes in if I'd like from this. And I can take any of the large, you know, 2.5 gram palettes and substitute into this. So not only do you have to see this as a palette, you can also look at this as a palette with singles contained within the palette. I know Lauren May Beauty touched on that, and now I'm starting to see the value in that as well, because sometimes you do have to factor in that not only are you going to buy the singles, but you have to buy the house in which you're going to showcase those singles in, and so that does cost money as well. I'm coming to find that out as well. It's never really more cost effective to own single shadows over a palette, even at the $129 price point, which this is, you know, it's a very pricey palette. But the singles really comes into play when you can see that I've used these, you know, 4 Makeup Geek shadows probably 2 to 3 times already just this year on duping palettes that I've chosen. That's not even duping palettes that, you know, daily emerge from, you know, the woodworks. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Leave your comments down below. Again, continuing that conversation on discontinuing palettes, how we feel about that, because I feel like a lot of you are getting your, you know, concerns out there, and the more we can talk about this, the more we can see, like, is this really that we're giving into FOMO? Are we buying because, you know, we truly do want the palette? I will say I truly did always want this palette. I wasn't really wanting to spend this much money on it. So besides that factor, I always have truly wanted to own this palette. So when I saw that it was discontinued, I go ahead, you know, I let myself feel that it's okay, what I have is good enough. But when it came back in stock, that invoked kind of this very uneasy feeling of, do I purchase or do I pass? And that really became like hard to navigate through. And if you're also struggling through that, then I think that that's perfectly fine. And also I think a lot of other people struggle through that as well. So just know you're not alone, and just know that there's many things to consider when you're purchasing, especially that large of a quantity of money towards a palette. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye.